Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
And welcome back. It's Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. Today we're talking from across the pond, as they used to say, to author Keith Wright from Nottingham, England. We have him on a Zoom meeting here, but we're just recording the audio part, of course. So Keith Wright, hello and thank you for joining us for this adventure.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So
it's a great honour.
Let's get back to your early life. Apparently you grew up in what's called a council estate. What is a council estate?
Well, so a council estate are houses that are provided by the council that you rent rather than having your own house. So I guess calling it the projects is a bit steep, but yeah, it was quite a rough area that I was brought up in, and eventually actually went on to police the same area, funnily enough.
So, and apparently you could have gone either way back in those days, to the police side or the other side.
I think so. It's an interesting one because, you know, we were all in the same environment, all scratching to survive, getting embroiled in things, climbing garage roofs, running around train lines and messing around like, you know, we weren't feral. And I think the only difference is the reason that I ended up on the path I ended up on, really, I guess, would be my mother, would be mum. And I think, you know, that's as silly as it may sound, there's so much to be said for upbringing. You know, I went to the same school. I arrested many friends, school friends over the years, who I'd gone to school with and who just took the wrong path. And the difference between us, I think, was, as I say, the upbringing and knowing what's right and wrong. And I guess it's within you as well. So, you know, it could have gone either way, I suppose. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one.
Now, apparently, libraries played a big part in your early life.
Well, they did, because there's just my mum at home, me and my sister and my mum. I've got older brothers, but they escaped as soon as possible. But my father was a functioning alcoholic, and things were always sort of excitable at home, shall we say, when I was a boy. I mean, he left when I was about 10, but having tried to kill mum, which can be, you know, quite an interesting experience as a young boy, strangling her with the cord of the lampshade. But it's again a strange one with my dad, because to some extent, as much as he was, you know, an awful father, he suffered in the war.
Right.
He went to war at 17, and his tank got hit. He was a tank driver by the age of 19. In the follow-up through D-Day, his tank got hit. All his friends were killed, murdered alive in front of him. And he became, as he said, bomb happy. And so he suffered mentally. And so much as we grew to dislike my father, sad to say, you know, stepping back from it to some extent, was it his fault? But there you go. You could say that with any sort of crime and anything else. Anyway, I mentioned that because that meant that my mum had to go out to work. And so when I came home from school, nobody was in.
Right.
So for quite a while, a number of years, on the walk back from school, you know, we didn't get taken to school in SUVs in those days. on the walk back from school was a library. And so I used to go in there for warmth and light and shelter, and wait till 5:30 or whatever for knowing that my mum would be home. And but of course in there, you're forced into looking at something called books.
Yes.
And it opened up a whole sort of new world. Although my mum was very much a reader and loved English and loved words and so on. But so that it was a thrill to go back when the first wave of books were published, and to go back to that library. And they remembered me and everything. This silly kid that used to sit there on his own,
Right.
I never thought they'd remember me, but they were thrilled to bits. You don't realise, do you?
And you decided to go into police work, and apparently a teacher said that you couldn't do it. Is that right?
Yeah, so in those days, certainly at our school, which was, you went in through one set of doors and out another set of doors and into a factory, generally speaking. And we were given a list of occupations. This is true, aged 14, 15, a list of occupations, and we had to tick 3. And I ticked postman,
Yep.
journalist, and policeman. I thought they sound all right to me. And but he says, "Oh, don't bother with the police. You'll never be a policeman. Forget that."
So there.
So only I didn't forget it. So I decided I'd go up to the police station on my own as a young kid. I don't know what the hell they thought of me. I've no idea. And said, "How do I become a policeman?" and they gave me the forms and to get an exam and interviews and physicals and all of those things. And so managed to somehow, mysteriously, who knows how, managed to sort of get in,
And then you took off. Your career was quite successful. You were, a detective at a young age?
Yeah, I was, at the time, the youngest to get on to CID. I'd only, 21, 22, 23, something like that. Which, you get to my age, you look back and it's, you're a kid really, but I was a mature kid, and I'd seen a little bit of life even at that tender age. And so I managed to get on to CID after a rather strange, times are so much different then, but I was interviewed by Detective Chief Inspector, old school. Bearing in mind, I'm going back to 85, something like that, that time, and 1985. And so he would have been, 1960 probably joined, so his career was coming to its end. And, he asked me very strange. He asked me what was the difference between a murder investigation. I can remember it now. A murder investigation and the theft of a bottle of milk. Well, a lot really. But what he was trying to get to, which I sort of managed to click, fundamentally they're the same.
They're the same. It's a crime. Somebody did it. Who did it? Why? Where? When?
So there's a victim. There may be witnesses. There's a route to find the witnesses, and then that's what he was trying to get. What, because obviously it's somewhat more convoluted with the murder investigation, but still, strange question. Took me by surprise.
Right. We're talking with Keith Wright from Nottingham, England, because I didn't introduce the fact that he's the author of the Inspector Stark series of books. The one I have in front of me is Murder Me Tomorrow. But CID, what does that stand for, please, Keith?
Criminal Investigation Department. So in England, in the UK, it's a different setup. But it's in Canada, I know you got perhaps not dissimilar, but we were the detective branch, almost a cross between FBI and detective branch. But I guess the closest would be to say the detective branch. So we dealt with major serious crimes that were referred to as under set criteria.
And DCI, that's Detective Chief Inspector. So the only experience I have with that is watching Prime Suspect. So I've got to figure out what all these initials mean. And then when I was a kid, there was a show on from England, Zed Cars.
Yes.
A TV show. And it was obviously about police and detectives and stuff, but that's all I read. What was a Zed car or a Z car, as they say in the States?
This is, hate to say, it's just a year or two before my time, strangely. I do remember it because one of the guys, it was set in Liverpool, and I think the Z was for Zulu cars, because they were we called them panda cars because they were black and white in the old days. So, but the call sign was Zulu 1 to Zulu 7, Zulu. So I believe that the Z in their instance would be Zulu, stand for the phonetic alphabet. I hasten to it.
Right. Okay. So that's talking about Zed Cars. We're reminiscing a bit here before we get to the actual writing part about talking books and writing and stuff. Like I said, the one we have in front of me, Murder Me Tomorrow, by Inspector Stark. Now, what happens in the opening of the book? There's a chap who is arrested for apparently killing his daughter and wife, and one of the police people says, well, that's it. The guy did it. Lock, stock, and barrel. He's done. Okay, case closed. But apparently that wasn't the case, obviously, as you read the book and get into it further. Now, was that actually, sometimes that's what happened? A guy would get nabbed and tossed into the clink, and that was it, because everybody figured he had done it, and so there was no reason to check into it further?
It's a two-pronged answer to this. So the easy answer is yes, that did happen sometimes, just before my day. I say that simply because there was in the 1980s, investigating a crime was almost the same as investigating a crime in Victorian England. There's fundamentally no difference whatsoever.
Okay.
Because we've got fingerprints. There's no DNA. No special blood finding stuff. No this, no that, no this. So we've got fingerprints. Nothing else. No CCTV. None of that. So it was very, very similar. Now, certainly in the Metropolitan Police, they had what they called a red book, I understand, and that was the book that the detective in charge would put it in. And given the opportunity, and I've heard stories from detectives, which I've no reason to doubt, old detectives to me, recounting a Superintendent Detective Gibsbeck saying, I don't want to hear anything else from anybody. He's done it. It's him.
Yep.
I don't want any fancy theories or anything like that. He's locked up downstairs. It's chuffing him, and that's it. So it did. I think it was the case, foolish though it was, of course, because, like we all know, potentially you then have a murderer loose because you haven't got the right guy. So I hope and like to think that was very few and far between. But, we're not naive. I guess that sort of thing did go on, certainly back in the day when there's a lot of pressure put on people to find the killer. And but the second prong of it really was when I first went into CID, there was still this sort of godlike approach by detective superintendents. What they said was it. They want a discussion about it. They want to have a nice chat or a debate. If I say X, it's X. Yeah. And that was very much the mentality. And we know, don't we now, I think, that that's not necessarily the best way to approach things. For example, they would always interview the suspect, the murder suspect. Well, they never interviewed anybody, the detective superintendent. They hadn't done it for years, And so they were the last people you would want to interview a murder suspect. But because it was important, and they're important in their minds, and they are, let's face it. But, so I'll go in and interview them as a detective superintendent. Well, you've got a detective sergeant here who interviews all day, every day. Mm-hmm. He's brilliant. And, or she's brilliant. And so, so that, and of course nowadays that's how they approach it. It's changed, So there was still this sort of second tier of this godlike approach to detective work.
So a lot of your books, are the Inspector Stark series, they're set in the mid to late 80s. So what was going on at that time in Nottingham and in England in general? Well, that was the Thatcher era, right?
Yeah, it was. So in the reason that I've kept them set in the mid 80s, 1987 actually, it's the year that never ends. every book so far is in 1987, and I don't see why I should change it.
Right.
Why should I move it forward? Why should I move it? Let's just forget about anything else. It's now 1987, and that's it. Basically, because in the 80s, that's when what was happening in Nottingham was I was a detective on the CID, so I know the culture, I know what was happening, I know how cops behaved and detectives behaved and criminals behaved. And of course, as I said, touched on just now, what I like about that time, and I'm thankful I was part of that time, is that we had to do something that cops seem very loath to do today. And that is we had to talk to people. We had to talk to people.
Right.
Because at the now, if there's no DNA, no fingerprints, no CCTV, it's undetectable, eh?
Yeah.
What? And this is the mentality of some of them. Now you've got to investigate it. If you ring the police sometimes with a crime, I say, well, who's done it? Well, I don't know. I was hoping you might find out. Well, no, sorry, unless eh? And so in those days, in the 1980s, as I say, it was almost, and I honestly don't think I'm exaggerating, apart from culture-wise, that, the format of it was very, very similar to as it's been 100 years.
Right.
It was about preserving a scene, yes, for fingerprints, not much else, blood grouping, perhaps,
Yep.
I don't know, bits and bobs, and anything else at the scene. Yes, take photographs, that's slightly different, so you don't have to have a sketch artist or so. But, fundamentally it was scene, potential suspects, witnesses, surveying the area, and off you go. And then you get into the strands and prioritise those strands of evidence, and whichever you prioritise, take that priority, and the team focus on that. So I just felt it was a good era to focus on. Yes, it was Thatcher time. It was post the miners' strike. I don't know whether you're familiar with that in England, but we had the miners' strike in 1984-85, which was a very, very it was a national strain for everybody, because it went on a long, long time, and it created a lot of problems within communities, striking and non-striking, particularly in Nottingham, because in Nottingham they worked. It was the only county really that worked. And so the pickets, thousands upon thousands, would come from all over the country to harass and harangue and demonstrate and fight and all those things. So, and the few that were striking would have problems also from the other side. So the other thing about the 80s is it was an interesting time for fashion. It was an interesting time for music. It was an interesting time for how people lived their lives. Again, you're right. If you were to be honest about writing a book today, and somebody sitting on a bus, nobody would be talking to anybody. Everybody just be staring at a phone in silence almost, And so
right.
There's no richness to me in today's society as an observer in that sense. Whereas, going back in time when, say, music times, people talked to each other, went out. If you wanted to go out with a girl, you had to go up and ask.
Right.
You didn't swipe right. You had to have the walk of doom, to go and ask her for a dance or whatever, and then the walk of doom all the way back again. But there you go. So that's really mainly because I was kicking around at that time doing that job.
That's good, and it makes sense. You write what you know about. What got you into writing in the first place? What sort of ticked that box?
Well, I'd always been interested in English and writing. I enjoyed it at school, but my mum enjoyed reading, and I'd be about 15-ish, something like that. And I don't know why, I don't know how. I still don't know to this day, and she's long gone, bless her. But she had about 10 a lot of second-hand books by Ed McBain.
Right, the 87th Precinct guy, yeah.
Yeah. And I started reading them. Well, they were brilliant.
Yep.
I was hooked. I couldn't get enough of them. And absolutely my hero in the writing world, Ed McBain. and gritty and realistic and believable, all of those things. And that was the germ, I think, that started me on joining the police and thinking about being a detective one day, but also the writing side, because it was so easy to, and I know it doesn't always work out like this, does it? But it was so easy to read. I thought it'd be so easy to write because it was in my language, sort of thing. Yeah. That's how it felt, if that makes sense. So it felt like I could have written it. Even at that, that's the realism that, and bizarrely, and and it's a strange one. The coincidence of this is mad, but I did meet him, Ed McBain.
Good.
I met him.
Wow.
And I was at the BoucherCon, the World Mystery Convention, on a panel. And while we were there was Ian Rankin was there, dropping some names out, Peter Robinson, anybody who was anybody was there. And somehow I happened to fall in with this gang. And it was mainly to do with the fact that I was smoking cigarettes, and all the in crowd seemed to do the same. But don't do it, kids. But that's how I fell into it, But anyway, blow me, Ed McBain, under the auspice of Evan Hunter, which was his real name, but other writing name anyway.
One of them.
Yeah. Well, he wrote The Birds.
Yep.
Evan Hunter, Ed McBain, which I didn't know at the time.
No.
He wrote The Birds, that became a very famous film.
Yeah, Hitchcock film. Yeah.
Hitchcock, thank you. Yep. Hitchcock film. Yep. And anyway, long story short, there was doing a remake and doing something or other at Broadway in Nottingham, and there was a film, and he'd come over, they'd flown him over to do it, and they'd invited him for a meal, for dinner. And they said, "Do you want to come?" I said, "What?
What?
Do I want to come?"
Do I?
This is the guy. This is crazy. And so, sure enough, I went and met Ed McBain, the very guy, going back 30 years before, whatever it was. The chances are just so remote. And I'm really pleased that I did, even though I think he was a little bit tired and exhausted.
Oh, right. Well, there you go. That's
never meet your heroes. Never meet. But no, it was great. It was a fantastic experience. Just the very fact of doing it, and it was a real treat. But that's what got me into thinking about writing. And then eventually, it was a few years later, I got married. We got twin boys, and I thought, God, I need some money. If only I'd known, how can I? Well, I'm not a mechanic. I can't do anything. I'm useless. I wonder if I could write a book. And so it was part of all of that in the mix. Of course, if you want to make money, don't be a writer.
Exactly.
But it can help pay the gas bill. So it was kind of all that. And once I actually wrote my first book, One Oblique One, in pen.
Oh, yeah.
I actually wrote it out in pen because it was typewriter days, and I didn't have a typewriter, but I wrote it out in pen, and then I thought, actually, this is quite good. I think I can do this. And so I then hired an electric typewriter and typed it all out, Right. I've still got the original handwritten script, and it was the original working title was The Stark Reality of Murder was the original working title. Of course, Stark, and that's what prompted the name Stark, the I Stark, was from that title. But we ended up choosing One Oblique One, which is the police code word for sudden death, I should add.
Gotcha. One Oblique One, right. I saw that. And Murder Me Tomorrow is what we're looking at. The Keith Wright, the author, with us. Some questions here I found on the website. How do you get inspired to write? So how do you get inspired to write? Let's ask you that question.
So a lot of from my perspective, there's a lot of sort of memory involved. What is it that I want to write about? I don't try and second guess the reader, because I think, again, I just think that's madness. Nobody knows what anybody else enjoys. You've just got to write for yourself. So I want to write things that I find interesting and exciting and that tell a good story. And a lot of the emphasis in my books is on characterization and on characters, both detectives and witnesses, because people are so funny and so strange, and so a lot of my writing is around characterization. So I the old beta waves when you're sitting in the bath having a shower or whatever, and suddenly you think of an idea and hold on, that's something, isn't it? Yeah. And so with Murder Me Tomorrow, I guess there's an element of conventionality in the fact that it's a serial killer. Mm-hmm. But there are elements within that serial killer, without giving the game away too much, that are odd. For example, he picks his victims at funerals.
Yeah, he likes going to funerals.
He uses a tennis ball as he uses a tennis ball as a gag. So he rams a tennis ball into the mouths of his victims, and there's a reason for that. So there's a background to this guy who is a psychopath, and so was his mother. But his upbringing, his only toy was a tennis ball. The one thing he held dear, was all he had in his squalor, was a tennis ball they used to throw against the wall. So it's that sort of thing. One idea leads to another, and it gives it hopefully some originality and some depth to it.
And what are you working on now?
So I've just had something called Death by Decree published, which is so this was the theme of that I wanted to do with Death by Decree was this element of us. We all think this is our life now, and we all think this is it forever, whether we consciously do or not. Oh, great! This is my life, and I've sort of made it. Yeah. This is it. And all of a sudden, life decides to smack you in the face with a kipper, yeah. And things change, and everything you thought you knew and everything you thought you were going to be and is gone out the window. Yeah. And things change. Yeah. And so that was the thing. And this is Death by Decree is a single woman who goes shopping one day. She's a single mother, and she's knocked into her shopping trolley. She's knocked into by this crazy woman, shouting, screaming, violent, and this crazy woman hurts herself in this melee. And it turns out, again, long story short, that she is the wife of the local gangsters, the brothers, the Brown brothers, who are very well known. Nasty men, gangsters. She thinks she can't have children, so they become a laughing stock, and they decide to take revenge. So her life changes in that moment, and her friends desert her, family are in danger, and in fact suffer all sorts of horrible repercussions because of it. So, and she eventually gets abducted, and Stark and the team, of course, are trying to get to her before it's too late. Okay. So that's that one. And I've just started plotting out a whip, as they say, work in progress. Right. Which is going to be it's going to be a stalker with a difference, shall we say? So it is a stalker type, but it's there's an element in it that's rather uncomfortable and odd. Well. And which is going to surprise a few people. Yep. And again, it comes back to people who appear normal on the surface, and everybody actually isn't who you think they are. Everybody is not what you think they are, I can assure you. And I'm not. Everybody has got a different element to them.
So, what's your daily routine? Do you have a daily routine? You write a certain amount of time a day, that kind of thing?
I'm an obsessive writer. I can't get enough of it. I really can't. So, I've worked over the years. I've worked for 40 years in the police and in the private sector. So I've done my stint. So I'm living the dream, although I work quite hard. So I get up and I do a bit of the bit that I really don't like is I do some social media stuff. Usually first thing when I'm having my coffee outside in the city. And so I do all my social media stuff, get it out of the way. Parts of it I enjoy. I enjoy making little videos and things like that for it, but writing's my thing, not marketing. And then I start writing. At the moment, I'm balancing all sorts of things because for some strange reason, back in 2020, in March, I decided to write a diary of the coronavirus.
Oh.
As a non-fiction book.
Right.
A diary of our lives and what was happening in the country at the time. Samuel Pepys style,
Yeah.
And little did I know that I'd still be writing it today.
Yeah.
So there's parts 1 to 3 are out.
Right.
Part 1, part 2, I'm on part 4, Beyond Freedom Day now we're on. But I'm doing the Audible books for those as well. So I'm kind of juggling. So I'm doing Audible work and they are humongous tomes, these diaries. And again, I've loved doing it actually, but it just sort of slows me a little bit down on getting the thrillers out.
Yeah.
So I'll do a little bit of audio work with that. I'll do some catch up on the actual writing of part 4. And then I'm free to either go across the road to Costa Coffee, where I often sit for hours, sipping up my coffee, typing away, people looking at this strange man, staring at the screen. So every single day I will write. Now, I hasten to add that there are times, for example, I was with my daughter Saturday, so nothing done, that's fine. You've got to have a life and not neglect your family. So, I'll have a day or two, where I'm not as full at it. But I'll work, because my wife she loves the job, she won't pack it in, even during Corona. And she tends to work evenings, so she'll work, till 8 o'clock-ish. So, come 1 o'clock, it's happy days. Hey, I can write to my heart's content, and so I'm bang at it all the time, constantly, and it's a thrill. I don't see it as work. I really don't.
And there we go. We thank Keith Wright for being with us on this podcast journey from his home in Nottingham, England, which is, of course, close by Nottingham Forest, which, of course, is where the Sheriff of Nottingham chased Robin Hood through Sherwood Forest. Well, close enough. Anyway, thank you, Keith Wright.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.